So as a teenager, did you have any part or full-time jobs?
When I got old enough, I was about 14, 15 at the time, I started working for a gentleman by the name of Bob DeCare, and he ran a fiberglass boat building. And we used to do boat repairs and building canoes and boats, and that's where I really got my love of sort of canoeing and outdoors and doing those things. Then in my later teens, when I reached the age of drinking age, I was able to get a job at the local liquor store. And that was probably one of the cleanest jobs I'd ever had, because it didn't involve fiberglass, didn't involve dust, didn't involve grinding. And I did that on through college, and then finally graduated from college with a college diploma in paramedicine. And so I became a paramedic at that time. So I would have been about 19 years old at the time.
Wow.
So it was always an expectation of our family that you would be working in the summer. Summers were not a time to sort of laze about and play about. And so most people in my family or in my neighborhood would have one, possibly two part-time jobs in the summer. So we kept pretty busy. Yeah.
So when you were young, do you remember playing with any popular toys or devices?
All of us had our favorite toys, and I'm sure a lot of people my age would remember that Christmas in those days, you would start around, say, October, because the catalog would come out, because you'd order things by catalog back then. And so you'd spend your time, your parents would say to you, okay, you're allowed one big toy this year. And the rest of the stuff was, you know, clothes and underwear. So you'd go through the catalog and mark off 25 things. And then you'd narrow it by September, October, you'd narrow it down to 20. And then by December, you'd be down to like 5 favorite things. And then your parents would pick one and they'd surprise you with that. So you'd get like one big toy. There was one doll called Chatty Cathy that my sisters really liked. And she was one of the first talking dolls. You'd pull the string and she'd say something. In terms of other toys, hockey equipment was always big, because most kids I grew up with played hockey. And hockey equipment was, as it is today, was pretty expensive. So, you know, if you're lucky, you get a pair of knee pads every 5 years. You get a pair of hockey pants every 10 years. In fact, the hockey pants I wore in midget, I wore them through all my junior years into senior hockey, and I think I finally buried them when I was 35 years old. I have enough complaints from the other guys in the room that I should put them to rest. So I had them, but I wore those hockey pants for like 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did people often get around through transportation?
Well, most families had cars in those days, but I say cars, but our family was pretty typical. My father was a teacher, and my mother was a supply teacher, and did part-time jobs in the community. So we had one car for years, and you'd share the car. That's how you get around. And it wasn't until I was in my teens, we had myself and 2 sisters driving, that my parents bought a second car. No seatbelts. No seatbelts, no safety. I don't ever remember a car seat as a kid growing up. No, kids didn't sit in car seats. They sat in the car, sat on mom's lap. My mother was safety conscious, and she was one of the first people in the neighborhood to actually use a seatbelt. And I still remember to this day, she would get in the car, at the passenger side, and she would put my sister on her lap, and then she'd put the seatbelt around both of them. And I don't know if you know much about seatbelts, but if you slam the brakes on and your weight accelerates, well, the only thing between her and the seatbelt was my sister. And so fortunately, we never got in an accident. I'm pretty sure it would have probably cut her in half. But she thought she was being safe, right? She'd put my sister and her both in the seatbelt. And she was the only person on the block that wore a seatbelt. Everybody laughed at her.
Wow.
Yeah, the other interesting thing about seatbelts in those days, when they first started to come out in the 60s, was you know where there's a hole inside the buckle where it clicks in? Yeah. Well, nowadays they're tiny, right? Well, in those days they were big enough you could use them as a bottle opener. And so a lot of people used to drink beer, and your seatbelt was your bottle opener. Yeah. I can remember the neighborhood, everybody would do that. You know, most of the dads in our neighborhood wouldn't go anywhere without a pint of beer sitting in the car with them, and they'd drive down. Yeah. Not much in the way of safety in those days. Yeah. Surprising we survived, but we did.
What inspired you to become a doctor?
Oh, that's a long story. So when I graduated from paramedic college and went to work, I met a lot of interesting people in healthcare, and there was a few that really inspired me. A couple were local doctors. There was Dr. Peter Cameron, and there was a Dr. Rob Helt. And you know, I got to know them over the years because they worked emerge, they worked family medicine. They were, in those days, GPs did everything. You know, they did surgeries, they did everything. And you know, I watched the way these guys worked with patients and the care and the compassion that they had, and it sort of inspired me to do the best that I could as a paramedic. So as a paramedic, I did a number of things, including I worked land, I worked air ambulance as well in Northern Ontario. And in the course of that, I started getting an interest in furthering my education. And, I came from a family that was not very well to do. If you were going to pursue further education, it was anticipated that you would pay for it somehow, because my dad in particular, didn't have the money to get you through university. So it never occurred to me to attend university when I was going to high school or going to college. And as I got to work with these guys and realized that, in a lot of cases they're no different than me, that I went and started taking courses at university part-time. It was one doctor in particular, it was Dr. Cameron, who just said to me one day, your marks are so good in school, and why don't you just go to medical school? And it had never occurred to me to even give that a shot. So I started to look into it and realized that I actually fit the criteria, the qualifications. And so at age 35, I quit my job and went off to medical school. I got accepted at McMaster the first year I applied, and started a new career. And I've always had a belief that healthcare is a calling. There are many people today that believe healthcare is a business, that people should be shuffled through as quickly as possible, that in and out the door, and the more patients you can process, the more money you make. It's never been a belief of mine, and I think that people who go to healthcare should view it as a calling, should view it as something, as a profession, as more than just a job. Because these are people's lives you're dealing with. It's not like, dealing with widgets on the factory assembly line. And unfortunately, there are some people in medicine who believe that that's the case, that you can process patients as quickly as possible. You can do, 50 scopes a day. You can do, 20 appendixes a day at the lowest cost, the lowest price, the lowest common denominator, forgetting that people are people. People are human. There's a human factor that you can't put a price on. You can't cost out. And the people that continue to inspire me today are those people that still view patients as people, as humans, as worthy of dignity and respect. And so that's what drives me every day to work out of the best that I can.
Do you have any interesting stories from your childhood or even adult years that you'd like to share?
Probably one of the most interesting cases I was involved in was an airplane that crashed at the Huronia airport here, and there was 6 people on board. And we probably spent 3 hours looking for them in the bush, because they'd gone off the end of the runway and they had crashed. And there was myself, and there was 2 paramedic crews, and of course there was Midland Fire Department, Tiny Township Fire Department, scouring the woods in the middle of the night. And we managed to find the plane, and there was 5 people dead inside. And people were a bit hesitant, the rescuers were a bit hesitant to get near it because you could smell the aviation fuel. And so my partner and I crawled into the plane, and I can remember in the dark crawling around trying to, feeling for pulses and things. And then somebody brought a flashlight up. And the people in the plane had a Doberman with them, and the dog, of course, died in the crash. But I can remember flicking on the flashlight, and the dog had his gums back and his mouth open. He was dead. And just flicking the flashlight on it, there was this Doberman staring at me with his mouth open. So anyhow, it took us probably about an hour to move all of the patients out of that plane. And it wasn't until we got to the bottom that we realized there was a young girl, about 16, who was still alive. And she was sort of underneath everybody else. She was quite severely injured. We brought her into our local hospital here and then transferred her down to, of course, there was no air ambulance in those days, but we transferred her down to Toronto Sunnybrook Hospital, and she survived that. She was in a coma for probably about a week. And I spoke with her years later about the accident and, what she did and didn't remember, and the fact that, she was flying along, and then the next thing she remembers is waking up a week later and her boyfriend was dead, her boyfriend's mom and dad were dead, her brother was dead. To just suddenly wake up and realize these people are gone was such a horrible thing for her. But the fact that we were able to save her, and I still remember the the adrenaline and the feeling of is this plane going to explode? Are we all going to go up? What's going to happen? Are we going to be able to get? Is there anybody alive? First of all, and doing this in the dark with very little in the way of lighting, and being so careful not to do something that's going to cause a spark. One of the reasons I left paramedicine was because at age 35, I felt that I was sort of struggling with the physical parts of the job, particularly things where you had to rappel down gorges and things. I probably didn't have quite the body strength and the energy that I'd had 10 years earlier. And so that played a bit of a part, but as I said earlier, most of the reason I went back to medicine was because I was inspired by people I worked with. But in terms of excitement, those were, there was always something exciting going on as a paramedic. We were going to shootings, we were going to stabbings, we were going to car accidents, we were going to, for a small community, we had lots and lots of bad things happen over the years that I was a part of.
What advice would you give to young people now pursuing into healthcare?
make sure it's something that you love to do. Healthcare is a profession that can eat you up if you're not careful. So in other words, no matter how compassionate you are, or how much empathy you have, it takes and takes and takes. It's very rewarding because when you're helping people and you see the gratitude on people's faces that you've somehow helped them or helped a family member. But I would say to young people starting out, make sure you're going into it for the right reasons. If you're going into it for money or for prestige, you're probably not going to last very long. If you're going into it because you like helping people and it's something you truly love and want to do, then by all means pursue it. The second bit of advice is be tenacious. Most of the programs in healthcare are designed to weed people out in the first semester. So you'll find that any healthcare program you're in the first semester, the work is incredible. You think, I'll never be able to do this. And then it sort of eases up as time goes by, or you get smarter and better at it. But if it's something you really love and you really want to do, hang in there, hang in there. Work as hard as you can, get the marks. And if it's something you really love, you'll get there.
Okay. Well, that's all of our questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for interviewing me.
Thank
It was
you.
fun.
Yeah, very good.